Hello Internet, welcome back to the channel. So just before I get into this, I just want to say this is not the normal sort of tone or topic that I enjoy covering on my channel. I usually try and keep the tone very, very positive. I avoid mudslinging at all costs because I don't think it achieves anything, and I'd rather focus on the scientific and philosophical nature of the phenomena rather than pointing at other people and criticizing. That being said, this video was originally going to almost solely focus on the 1933 crash retrieval from Magenta in Italy, which David Grusch talks about in his testimony to Congress. But during the research for that video, I watched a lot of other podcasts and a lot of other sort of social media commentary. And I noticed that there's a real growing wave of criticism and fatigue in listening to people that are trying to disseminate information whilst working around NDAs and security responsibilities. So, also, I had a bit of trouble with my laptop, which is on its last legs. So there's going to be a bit of cutting and jumping and whatnot. So just bear with me. And so instead, I thought it would be worthwhile to make a short video, not just in defense of David Grusch, but all of these whistleblowers that you'll see on podcasts and on news, trying to get very sensitive information out into the public realm. My goal is that we'll have a little bit more compassion and appreciation for these people rather than them just towing the line, in which case we wouldn't learn anything. So let's get into it. Okay, so the biggest criticism of David Grusch, Lou Elizondo, Gary Nolan, all of these guys that are seemingly in the know, is people want disclosure. The internet is on fire with tiki torches and pitchforks saying, we want disclosure. But the thing is, this is a lot like when, after September the 11th, George Bush declared war on terror. It's such a nebulous, generic term which means different things to everybody that it can never be achieved. So the first and main thing that you need to get right in your own head is, what does disclosure actually mean to you? Now, there are, as I've said before on Jimmy's podcast, there are three main ways that you can spend your time when you're looking into UAP. The first is looking at witness testimonies. Now, this is great. There's loads and loads of data out there. My last video was 100 years of different UFO cases. Definitely fascinating, loads to get your teeth into, and some data that you can analyze to increase your understanding of the phenomena itself. The second is this spy versus spy, government controversy, secret programs, black projects. He said this, he didn't say that stuff, which is fascinating. There's loads of data out there because it's human stuff. It's basically politics. But it's not going to increase your understanding of the phenomena. The best case scenario, if all of this comes out, is we'll understand what the government knows, which, when you listen to people like Chris Bledsoe, who is constantly surrounded by CIA, Air Force, every multi-letter agency you can think of, they say things to him like, this thing doesn't like us, so we hang out with you because it likes you. So they're going to experiences to learn about it. So we're either doing a Scooby-Doo mystery of who done it and who's been covering things up for so long, whereas we're actually not learning much about the phenomena itself. I have immense respect for Ross Coulthard, but I watched his podcast yesterday where he was talking about the Eglin Air Force Base encounter with the F-22 Raptor, or as it now appears, two F-22 Raptors. This was mentioned by Matt Gaetz in the testimony to Congress, and they spent about 2 minutes talking about the actual event, and the whole rest of the podcast was talking about the Pentagon and who's done this and who hasn't said this. So it's almost a psyop in itself that if we are encouraged with all this infighting and investigation of all the politics behind it, we're not looking at the actual root goal, which is understanding more of the phenomena. Now, granted, the third area to investigate is the phenomena itself. And that's something which, at risk of sounding a bit of a hippie, I think you can understand more of by reading ancient history or meditating or understanding psychic phenomena and things like that, because they all seem to be interlinked. But there's very little tangible data to study out there on the internet. So I appreciate why people get bogged down into the others. But for your own mental health, you've got to understand where your end goal is and what you want to understand. For me, what I would consider disclosure would be the NHI is a thing, it's been interacting with us, here's some proof. So based on that, a brilliant, in my opinion, place to start was the crash that David Grusch mentioned in his testimony to Congress under oath, which is the 1933 Magenta crash in Italy. Now, I'm going to get later on into the constraints and the process that people like Elizondo and Dave Grusch have gone through in order to be able to give any of these details out, which is called a DOPSA. But for now, just understand that every single word that comes out of his mouth has been vetted and cleared. So he's not able to veer off into a different word or a different sentence. He's not allowed to give any extra detail when pressed. But let's hear what he said so far.
So let's start from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. You say it's a 90-year cover-up.
Just about, yeah.
90 years?
1933 was the first recovery in Europe, in Magenta, Italy. They recovered a partially intact vehicle.
It's true, it's real.
Yeah, that actually happened. Italian government moved it to a secure air base in Italy for the rest of kind of the fascist regime until 1944, 1945, and the Pope Pius XII back-channeled that.
So the Vatican was involved?
Yeah, and told the Americans what the Italians had, and we ended up scooping it.
So let me be very clear about this. You're saying that the Catholic Church, the Vatican, they know about the existence of non-human intelligence on this planet?
Certainly.
This stuff is landing or crashing around the world, and unexpected countries have had this happen, and that's why I picked that, because I thought that was a interesting case. And then, of course, Pope Pius XII and the Vatican were involved, back-channeling it through the OSS, which became the CIA later, to FDR, and that's how the U.S. knew something weird happened in Italy right before World War II. But
so this is 33 was the first documented.
That is the earliest one I can talk about. Yeah,
there's something that predates that.
You could infer that.
You could infer that.
Yeah.
So this 33 one you said was in Italy.
Yeah, Magenta. So it's I'm bad at geography. I think that's like Lombardy region. It's like northwest Italy.
And what's the story behind it?
So basically, it looked like it crashed, right? The original shape most likely was like a lenticular disc-like craft, with like two dinner plates.
What
right?
does lenticular mean?
So like two dinner plates, smushed together, right? The hump, and there's like a bubble on top.
Like the classic
saucer. Like that.
Like that. Okay.
But it looks like when it hits, the edges broke off, so it became this like bell or acorn shaped thing. And there was nothing in it. It was like just an artifact. There was no biological remnants, if you will. So it's so funny because the Italians were so confused, they actually called up the Germans and they were like, is this one of your Wunderwaffe? Like, what the hell just crashed in northern Italy? Mussolini, and this is all publicly available information because some Italian researchers found all these original documents that some people were sitting on for years in Italy.
That would be these documents that I'm going to show you next. And they were first brought into the public sphere by Roberto Pignotti, who's a great journalist that I've been trying to get hold of for ages, and given to awesome journalist Chris Sharp, who did a brilliant podcast episode on the UAP files, which you should check out. In these, one of the documents is signed by Mussolini himself, and most importantly, these have been forensically tested and proven to be from the date 1936, which is when they are dated. So, anyway, back to Dave.
I know people that know that specific event that are currently still intel officers within this program in detail. But
So what happened to that vehicle?
so we knew where it was being stored at a particular location after the crash, and then the military came in and we grabbed it towards the end of the war, 1944, 1945, because, like I said, Pope Pius XII already kind of let FDR know.
Why'd the Pope get involved? Because it's
Well,
in Italy?
Well, interestingly enough, there's like a whole history of human intelligence prior to World War II and old money, the Vatican, the Italian mob, kind of the old country boys did a lot of informal intelligence collection for the U.S. And there's probably some books you can read on it, but it's really interesting. Human intelligence collection wasn't really formalized until the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which became the CIA in 1947. You had Paul Mellon and all these other affluent guys of all these old money families that basically created the CIA. So that's probably the reason why.
So this thing that was recovered, this was the first documented one that the United States had access to?
I can't get into if it was the first or not, but it was an early one.
Very early.
Yeah.
So it's almost 100 years ago.
Yes.
And so they take this thing and then they bring it where?
Yeah, I can't get into those
Can't get
details.
into that.
No.
Okay. So they bring it somewhere in the United States.
Okay, so this clip perfectly highlights the tightrope that David Grusch has to walk when talking about crash retrievals or anything sensitive. The reason he's chosen the 1933 Italian case, which is something that Joe Rogan completely misses here, is because he's talking about a dead government and a foreign agent. So he's not going to get in any trouble at all. You can talk about the Nazis, the Axis powers, Mussolini in as much granular detail as you have data for without compromising NDAs, DOPS or agreements, or giving away US secrets, which is why he absolutely stonewalls it anytime Joe tries to turn the conversation onto US activity, like where it went or who recovered it and stuff like that. Here's a clip of Lou Elizondo essentially treading very much the same water as David Grusch, which makes sense because they've obviously got a certain set of data that they will allow to be discussed about it. But just have a listen to how Lou tackles exactly the same tricky water.
Well, I think people are now beginning to realize, and I kind of gave a few hints before, but Roswell may not have been the first event. And well known. I mean, there's been some reporting internationally as well that there have been some crashed vehicles, and they were obtained by local authorities, and there was some scientific study done on them. I want to be very careful not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I've seen personally some documentation that's very compelling from a particular foreign country where they had a recovery of a vehicle, and they had some countries conducting scientific analysis on it, and after World War II, allegedly parts of that vehicle were brought to the United States.
Yeah, I think I know what country that was. It was a South American country, I think. Maybe Brazil. Damn it! Argentina. I'm not sure. I think it's
Italy. Italy.
Yeah, it was Italy.
Yeah, that's as it was explained to me. I saw some documentation. Look, I don't want to get too much into the conspiracy side of the house. There is some documentation that has been validated that was from Mussolini himself. And it's authentic. It's been proven to be authentic, the documentation. So certainly interesting.
So some extra complimentary information that I found out was that Mussolini set up a recovery and investigation agency called RS-33. All of this you can find from a Google or a read of Chris's article in the Daily Mail. And that recruited to that was Marconi, the inventor of the radio, who was also a big public talker about extraterrestrials and how he wanted to use radio waves to try and search for them at that time. So a very logical addition to the team. So also the building involved with was the SIAI, I'm probably butchering that, it's SIAI Marchetti hangar, which had a big fire in 1943. The contents of it were moved to Mussolini's private bunker, which was inside a mountain, and that was later seized by the Nazis at the end of 1943. So, I haven't got it on record, but I would imagine that that was the point, just prior to the Nazis capturing it, that it was handed over to the Vatican for safekeeping, and from there to what would become the CIA, the OSS.
And was the attempt to try to back engineer this thing, was the attempt to try to understand what it was?
Yeah, I mean, first of it, obviously, it's understanding the situation, right? What do we have our hands on? And like I've said in some other videos and stuff, that we took the Manhattan Project secrecy and overlaid it on this issue because that secrecy worked well for atomic bomb developments and whatnots. And certainly this whole program in a nutshell, if I were to summarize the 90 plus years of history, it is a reverse engineering program to garner some kind of insight. And of course, not a lot of the things that we've learned from it are directly, ripped off the technology we found, but it has inspired other innovations that made its way into other U.S. classified programs over the year for national defense reasons, and it's a myriad of different things. So
the UFO folklore is that this is where fiber optics were discovered first.
Yeah, I'm not going to break the seal on anything we've discovered or anything like that. And yeah, it's a place I can't go to.
How limited are you in what you can discuss and what you can't discuss, and why?
Yeah.
Why do they let you discuss any of this?
Yeah, so anything sensitive that I want to say as it relates to U.S. government activity, whether it be intelligence stuff, military stuff, etc., I have to submit it through what they call DOPSR, DoD Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review.
Okay, so this really is critical to why this frustration is being created about people on podcasts. They're not just having a chat. Every single thing that they discuss has to go through a DOPSR application. And it's the same whether you're going to do an interview on television and talk about something which is a protected subject, or if you're going to write a book. So, for example, Lou Elizondo's book that he's trying to write has been delayed for ages because he sent it off to be double-checked in his DOPSR application. And depending on the length of the book, it can take ages. So I know that Skinwalkers of the Pentagon, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, took, I think it was a year and a half to get back from its DOPSR application. And I know I said at the start of the video that I'm trying to be positive, but frankly, if you want to see a car crash conversation around a DOPSR agreement, then you've got to watch the Weaponized episode where Jeremy Corbell is interviewing Dr. Lakatsky about his book that he published with Colm Kelleher. In the book, he states that the US had recovered a craft and they gained access to it at a certain point. And unfortunately, Jeremy Corbell just tries to hammer Lakatsky around the head with, yeah, but what about this? Tell me about this. Can you answer me this question? And Dr. Lakatsky very patiently, again and again, says, I can't make this any clearer. I am cleared to say the exact words in the book. I can't say anything else. He even tries to help him out by saying, here's some questions you should be asking. Which goes, now I appreciate in the heat of battle when you're trying to do a podcast and do as well as you can, that this could easily be missed. But Lakatsky says, why would there be a Brazilian military official there? Now, if you have time to chew this over, it's probably hinting that they've got the recovered Varginha craft. But he can't say that because he's not DOPSA cleared. He can suggest questions vaguely that, he's literally dropping a sweetie there for somebody to pick up. But he cannot say, oh yeah, it was the one from Varginha in Brazil, because that would be breaking his DOPSA agreement. It is kind of a lose-lose situation for the people issuing the DOPSA, though, because if, for example, they say, oh my God, no, you can't talk about the Varginha incident in Brazil, then because there is a block in place, that obviously implies that that situation took place, or at least that there is something classified regarding that situation.
And for them, I mean, I'm not in their OODA loop, but certainly it's a catch-22 for them where if they want to redact and they propose a redaction, they're like, hey, Dave, you can't say these sentences. You can rewrite it and resubmit. We can't necessarily tell you what agency said to redact it, but you're not allowed to say this. They would be basically self-certifying there's a there. So in my opinion, probably the policy is like, if it has to deal with the subject, we're not saying anything. We're not proposing any redactions. As long as he's not burning a conventional program, we kind of have to allow him to exercise his First Amendment rights. And so I think it's like a catch-22 for that office is kind of the long.
Another common criticism of whistleblowers is, well, why don't they just say everything they know and blow the lid off everything? And frankly, it's because they are a patriot. It's not because they are against the system that they are whistleblowing. It's just that they want a particular aspect of that system to get out into the public. So, for example, if David Grusch said, oh, yeah, we're working on this. We've got this many craft. There's this size of team on it. They're in these places. That is undermining the security systems in place and giving people that they perceive as adversaries some very, very valuable intelligence, essentially spying for the adversaries of your country.
I'm not here to help Russia and China calibrate their intelligence collection. Like, oh, Dave said it's this number. We missed a couple. Shit. Let's put it out for the KGB, SVR, and GRU are now going to hit the streets to try to figure out which ones they miss. So I'm here to protect national security, and I'm just trying to put all the general topics out there for public conversation to hold our government accountable, really. So, because I'm here as a fact witness, because we have a constitutional oversight issue because this program has not been reported to Congress in the appropriate way.
It's also really, really important to bear in mind just how many people are watching. I mean, Joe Rogan's the biggest viewed podcast in the world, but we know that these people have their critics and they are waiting on their every word for the opportunity to try and discredit them. And it's not always from angles you'd expect. John Greenwald in the Black Vault is very vocally extremely anti-David Grusch for some reason. He's had that reporter on his show calling him a drunk. So if David Grusch were to say something which could be proven through good journalism to be fake, then you could rip his whole campaign down. It's just for the exact same reason that Gary Nolan says, don't pin it on a conclusion, because as soon as that's wrong, you look like a turkey, frankly. So bear that in mind. So how do we get around that? Well, one thing that you can't do is commit perjury. So we can really analyze the stuff that David Grusch said in his testimony to Congress. So let's have a quick look at some of those clips.
But also, finally, I'd like to thank these three brave witnesses here. They took an oath. They took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and dadgummit, they're doing it. And we owe them a debt of gratitude.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative. You may be seated.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members and congressmen, thank you. I'm happy to be here. This is an important issue, and I'm grateful for your time. My name is David Charles Grusch. I was an intelligence officer for 14 years, both in the U.S. Air Force, both active duty, Air National Guard, and Reserve, at the rank of major, and most recently from 2021 to 2023, at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, at the GS-15 civilian level, which is the military equivalent of a full bird colonel. I was my agency's co-lead in unidentified anomalous phenomena and transmedium object analysis, as well as reporting to the UAP Task Force, UAPTF, and eventually, once it was established, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO. I became a whistleblower through a PPD-19 urgent concern filing in May 2022 with the Intelligence Community Inspector General. Following concerning reports from multiple esteemed and credentialed current and former military and intelligence community individuals that the U.S. government is operating with secrecy above congressional oversight with regards to UAPs. My testimony is based on information I've been given by individuals with a long-standing track record of legitimacy and service to this country, many of whom also have shared compelling evidence in the form of photography, official documentation, and classified oral testimony to myself and my various colleagues. I have taken every step I can to corroborate this evidence over a period of 4 years while I was with the UAP Task Force and do my due diligence on the individual sharing it. This is because of these steps, I believe strongly in the importance of bringing this information before you. I am driven by a commitment of both to truth and transparency, rooted in our inherent duty to uphold the United States Constitution and protect the American people. I'm asking Congress to hold our government to this standard and thoroughly investigate these claims. But as I stand here under oath now, I am speaking to the facts as I've been told them. In the U.S. Air Force, in my National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, reservist capacity, I was a member of the UAP Task Force from 2019 to 2021. I served at the NRO Operations Center on the Director's Briefing staff, which included the coordination of the Presidential Daily Brief and supporting a variety of contingency operations, which I was the Reserve Intelligence Division Chief backup. In 2019, the UAP Task Force Director asked me to identify all special access programs and controlled access programs, also known as SAPs and CAPs, we needed to satisfy our congressionally mandated mission, and we were direct report at the time to the DepSecDef. At the time, due to my extensive executive level intelligence support duties, I was cleared to literally all relevant compartments and in a position of extreme trust, both in my military and civilian capacities. I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, to which I was denied access to those additional read-ons when I requested it. I made the decision, based on the data I collected, to report this information to my superiors and multiple inspectors general, and in effect becoming a whistleblower. As you know, I've suffered retaliation for my decision, but I am hopeful that my actions will ultimately lead to a positive outcome of increased transparency. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Do you believe that officials at the highest levels of our national security apparatus have unlawfully withheld information from Congress and subverted our oversight authority?
There are certain elected leaders that had more information that I'm not sure what they've shared with certain Gang of Eight members or et cetera, but certainly I would not be surprised.
Okay. You've stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
Okay, I can't ask when you think this occurred. If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And was this documentary evidence, this video, photos, eyewitness? Like, how would that be determined?
The specific documentation I would have to talk to you in a skiff about.
Gotcha.
So there's probably another hour's worth of clips that I've got ready of David Grusch's testimony to Congress. But if you're just here wanting to know whether UFOs are a thing or if they're seagulls or swamp gas or balloons, as we are often told, that's your silver bullet. That's it. He's just said that the US has a UAP crash retrieval program and are back engineering craft. And he's not in prison. So game over, frankly, as far as disclosure is concerned, depending on what your definition of it is. In what you will see in the rest of his testimony is a lot of confusion because 99% of the people in that room don't have the clearances he has. So just like he's on a podcast, he can't go into detail and say, yeah, they're at, this Air Force base, we're doing this. Exactly the same as if he was talking to Joe Rogan. The difference is people like Matt Gaetz and what they call the Gang of Eight, who are the oversight committee. They would have not entire clearances, but more clearances than the rest. So most of them would have oversight over the special access programs. There are another tier of those, the waived ones, which I won't bother going into. But yeah, I mean, like I said, if you're looking for disclosure, that was it just there.
Mr. Grusch, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General, and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
And what did the intelligence community Inspector General say? That David Grusch's complaint was credible and urgent. And he definitely knows what he's talking about. So, given that he's got more oversight than anybody else, for people on podcasts to be saying, oh, I don't know, I'd like to believe him, but he's a bit fishy, it's just silly. Now, I am just going to show you one more clip from that testimony because he discusses interdimensionality, which the great mistake that we make is to think that other dimensions work like some sort of Doctor Strange thing where you look through it and you can see somewhere else. It's the same place, but just more complicated. So this is, and again, it's got to be accurate because he's under oath. This is Grusch's take on the interdimensional capabilities of these craft, and then a little explanation afterwards.
One of my constituents actually sent this next question, and I figured I'd ask it since I had the same thought. You've said that the U.S. has intact spacecraft. You said that the government has alien bodies or alien species. Have you seen the spacecraft?
I have to be careful to describe what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors. Yeah.
And have you seen any of the bodies?
That's something I've not witnessed myself.
Okay, and so with that being said, and the other statement that has been made that was intriguing to me it's intriguing because my view has been that we are billions of light years away from any other system. And the concept that an alien species that's technologically advanced enough to travel billions of light years gets here and somehow is incompetent enough to not survive Earth or crashes is something that I find a little bit far-fetched. And with that being said, you have mentioned that there's interdimensional potential. Could you expound on that?
Yeah, to answer your first question, and I'm here as a fact witness and expert, but I will give you a theoretical framework, at least to work off, to kind of espouse crashes, regardless of your level of sentience, right? Planes crash, cars crash, n number of sorties, however high, a small percentage are going to end in mission failure, if you will, as we say in the Air Force. And then in terms of multidimensionality, that kind of thing, the framework that I'm familiar with, for example, is something called the holographic principle. It derives itself from general relativity and quantum mechanics, and that is, if you want to imagine a 3D object such as yourself casting a shadow onto a 2D surface, that's the holographic principle. So you can be projected, quasi-projected from higher dimensional space to lower dimensional. It's a scientific trope that you can actually cross, literally, as far as I understand, but there's probably guys with PhDs that we could probably argue about that.
So what would a 4D object look like to us? Well, it depends what part of that 4D object is passing through our 3D space. I've received word that a 4D ball is about to pass through our world. Please stand by. Right now, we can see a small sphere, because this slice is near the edge of the 4D ball. It grows in size as it moves through our world, and right now we see it as its largest because this slice is at the middle of the 4D ball. It shrinks again as it continues to move through our world, and now we don't see it. The 4D ball still exists, but our slice of space does not contain it. A 4D creature would still see the ball and know exactly where it is, but we are not gifted that kind of perspective.
Have you faced any retaliation or reprisals for any of your testimony or anything on these lines?
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say in detail because there is an open whistleblower reprisal investigation on my behalf, and I don't want to compromise that investigation by providing anything that may help provide somebody information. But it was very brutal and very unfortunate, some of the tactics they used to hurt me both professionally and personally, to be quite frank. Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. As they say, when you're over the target, that's when they do the most firing at you. Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes. Personally.
Have anyone been murdered that you would that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
So just as a final point really on Grusch in particular, you have to consider the caliber of the people that he's upsetting. So not only is he blowing the whistle on the corporations, the contractors for the intelligence agency, people that make weapons to kill people, your Boeings, your Northrop Grummans, your Lockheed Martins, your Raytheons. He's also blowing the whistle on agencies that kill people for a living. So he is taking an enormous risk by coming forward at all.
Yeah, there were certain colleagues of mine that were brutally administratively attacked, and it actually makes me very upset as a leader to see that happen to other coworkers and actually superiors of mine over the last 3 years.
How do you account for that response? That seems like a bizarre response.
I call it administrative terrorism. That's their quiver, their tool in the toolbox to silence people, especially. The career government service cares about their career, cares about their clearance, their reputation to climb the ladder. And when you threaten that career path, a lot of people back off. But I'm here to represent those people.
Okay, so there's probably just one final point I'd like you to consider, which is why haven't Arrow come up with anything to back up or even remotely support the claims of these whistleblowers? Now, I just want you to consider, if you've ever worked for a reasonably sized company, they'll probably have a HR department. And on paper, the legal role of that department is to support you. On the front line, you can go to them with any concerns, you can whistleblow for bad activity or point out anything that's illegal or untoward, and they will give you full confidential support. How that usually plays out is that the HR office is right next to the boss's office, and the second the door closes behind you, they will go to the boss and say, "We have got a problem with this guy," and they will then manage, with the entire focus on the company's well-being, on how to get through that situation, and if necessary, deal with disciplinary behavior or get rid of people. So, given that Arrow are a Pentagon office investigating potential wrongdoing by the Pentagon, Why are we surprised that we've not heard anything from them? Also, Jimmy on the UAP Files podcast made a much better point of this by suggesting that were you to go and testify to Arrow and sign an NDA, which would appear to be part of the process, there would be, had they any malintent, there would be very, very easy for them to go, okay, brilliant, well, thanks for that testimony. We're definitely going to look into it anyway. So just something to consider as we go along. Anyway, thank you very, very much for watching this video. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope you understand the process more. I would really like to know your thoughts in the comments. If you haven't already, I'd really appreciate a sub or a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.
I also want to note that Mr. Sean Kirkpatrick, Director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the component of the DoD office that investigates UAP data, has testified before the Senate this year that his unit has found no evidence of extraterrestrial activity. NASA has also stated that they don't have evidence of extraterrestrial life either, and we've heard this, of course, from some of our government agencies.
Mr. Grusch, in your sworn testimony, you state that the United States government has retrieved supposedly extraterrestrial spacecraft and other UAP-related artifacts. You go so far as to state that the U.S. is in possession of, quote, non-human spacecraft, end quote, and that some of these artifacts have circulated with defense contractors. Several other former military and intelligence officials have come forward with similar allegations, albeit in non-public settings. However, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of AARO, previously testified before Congress that there has been, and I quote, no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity or of, quote, off-world technology brought to the attention of the office. To your knowledge, is that statement correct?
It's not accurate. I believe Dr. Kirkpatrick mentioned he had about 30 individuals that have come to Arrow thus far. A few of those individuals have also come to Arrow that I also interviewed,
Okay.
and I know what they provided Dr. Kirkpatrick and their team.
Okay.
I was able to evaluate
Okay,
that information.
I need to go on.
Is everyone okay?
What happened? Did anyone see?
Someone drove a hot dog-shaped car through the window.
Driver's gone. Somebody call the cops. We need to find that driver.
They could have killed someone.
Whose car is this?
Yeah, come on. Whoever did this, just confess. We promise we won't be mad.
What?